The world is flooded with secret societies. Their members range from unknown citizens and eccentrics to top executives in the most important companies, banks, and even governments.
Secret societies have actively participated in the construction of the American governmental system. Freemasonry, to name just one society, left its imprint on the Declaration of Independence, the American Constitution, and on dozens of national symbols, from the Great Seal of the US to the dollar bill. This American passion for secrets, rituals, and exclusive clubs has been particularly strong in its universities, where the fraternity system was developed. The fraternities, or frats as they're most commonly referred to, are student associations with academic and philanthropic goals. However, they also abound in codes of silence and initiation rites, very similar to those found in Freemasonry and other secret societies. Skull and Bones was founded in 1832. Its original name was the Eulogian Club. Its creator was a merchant named William Huntington Russell, owner of Russell and Company, a transport company which was rumored to smuggle opium into China during the Opium Wars. The name Skull and Bones probably comes from a curious tradition. During their meetings in the campus chapel at Yale, the society used to hang a skull and 2 crossed shin bones upon the door as a warning that they should not be disturbed. The society was also known as the Order of Death, Cooperation Star, or simply the Order. At least 3 American presidents were or are Bonesmen: George W. Bush, his father George H. Bush, and William Taft. The government of the world's only superpower is packed with Bonesmen. George W. Bush named 11 Bonesmen officials in his first government. Add to this various senators, congressmen, and chief justices, directors of the CIA, the Federal Reserve, and directors of banks such as J.P. Morgan Chase and Morgan Stanley Dean Witter. The American media is little different. Among others, Time and Newsweek magazines, in theory competitors, were both founded by Bonesmen. The oldest and most influential families also belong to this select club: Bush, Bundy, Harriman, Lord, Phelps, Rockefeller, Taft, Whitney. All of them have undergone the odd ritual of initiation. All have spilled their darkest secrets. All have been ritually humiliated in front of their peers. And all of them owe loyalty to the Order. It is estimated that there are some 800 Bonesmen alive today, around half of them active and in key positions in the American economy and political establishment. The proposition that this small club of the well-to-do pulls the strings of American power, and through it those of the whole world, by placing its associates in key power positions, is supported by substantial evidence. The elections of 2004 saw the almost impossible come true. Both the Republican candidate George W. Bush and his Democrat rival John F. Kerry were members of Skull and Bones. That's to say, prior to running as representatives of parties that supposedly propound opposite political visions, they had both sworn allegiance to the same mysterious principles. And what's worse, they share secrets that are not known to their own constituents.
A much more serious accusation hangs over the Brotherhood of Death: its sympathy for the Nazis.
Critics of Skull and Bones insist that the society is not originally American, but rather an offshoot of some German right-wing order. This could well be true. Its founder, William Russell, did indeed live for some time in Germany before attending to his senior year at Yale. And it was actually on returning to the USA that he established the fraternity. The number 322, the order's identifying number, hides a coded message. The 32 represents the year of its foundation, 1832. And the additional 2 stands for the fact that it's the second chapter within an international order. Alexandra Robbins, a Yale graduate and author of a book on the subject, stated that the society owns a valuable collection of Nazi objects and memorabilia, and eats its dinners off Hitler's private silver service. A large part of their liturgy is written in German.
A sizable part of the American military-industrial complex of the early 20th century collaborated with the Nazi regime in Germany, contributing immensely to their rise to power. This historical fact is unknown to most people even today. Also unknown is the strong involvement of Bonesmen in the pre-war German-American relations. But history keeps its own records, and the past always returns to haunt us.
In 1930, Prescott Sheldon Bush, father of President George H. and grandfather of President George W., a member of the Skull and Bones class of 1917, and president of the Union Banking Corporation, engaged in a number of profitable business deals with Fritz Thyssen, the German steel tycoon who supplied Hitler's war machine. The UBC was closed by President Truman during the Second World War under the Trading with the Enemy Act. In other words, for doing business with the Nazis. Apart from Prescott Bush, several other directors of the Union Banking Corporation in New York were also 1917 Bonesmen, including E. Rowland Harriman and Ellery Sedgwick James. In 1938, Bush, by then executive associate of Brown Brothers Harriman, issued a loan to Hitler's Germany to enable the latter to import American Standard Oil fuel.
In 1941, the year the United States entered the war against the Third Reich, Standard Oil, which belonged to Rockefellers, Bonesmen themselves, had 6 oil tankers sailing under Panamanian flags and manned by German crews. These vessels carried fuel from their American refineries to the Canary Islands, where their German submarines were being refueled. In the meantime, Allied troops were losing their lives on European battlefields.
Investigator Anthony Sutton claims that Skull and Bones is not at all an American society, but a branch of a foreign secret society. According to this expert, it is one of the reasons why secrecy in the order is so vital.
It's not another college fraternal society. Why 322? There are several theories for this. One is that the order originated with Demosthenes, the Greek, in 322 BC. That's one theory. Another one is that it stems from the founding date in the United States, which was 1832. So really we have the last 2 numbers, 32, the second chapter, founded in 1832. They want to acquire power above all.
Power
Political
to do what?
power. As you look at their actions, the political power is to bring about what they call a new world order, which is a one world.
The basis of Freemasonry, which all Masons go through, is the Blue Lodge. The Blue Lodge being the first 3 degrees or levels of Freemasonry. Entered Apprentice, the 1st degree, Fellowcraft, the 2nd degree, and Master Mason, the 3rd degree. Most Masons never go beyond 3rd degree. Although if one chooses to go beyond the Blue Lodge, there are 2 routes that can be taken. One is the York Rite, and one is the Scottish Rite. Most Masons who decide to go past the Blue Lodge enter the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The Scottish Rite has 32 degrees. The 32nd can lead one into the Shriners, if one so chooses. The 33rd degree, which does exist, is largely honorary. Author Ian Taylor has extensively researched the origins of modern Freemasonry.
To many people, the very word Freemasonry evokes a sense of mystery, secret society, and so on. But in order to find out what they're all about, we need to know a little history. There were many humanist thinkers back in the 1500s who saw the corruption that there was in the church of the day, and they concluded that in order to get rid of that corruption, they would have to be a new world order. They had read Plato's Republic. Plato's Republic in the 1500s was now a popular work, and Plato too was a Greek philosopher living in the 5th century BC, and he too was totally fed up with the corruption that there was in government. He said, if we could have a group of wise men who were well paid to rule over the people, then there would be no corruption. It's a nice thought, but a rather naive one. We've seen such governments today, and they are totally corrupt. But nevertheless, there are still people today, many people, who think that it is a good idea. This then was the agenda for the humanist thinkers back in the 1500s. But in order to do that, they had to first destroy the existing world order based upon the rules of God through the king and through the church. But to even suggest this would have been seen to be heresy in its day, and they would have lost their heads quite literally. And so they had to go into a secret society. Now, the Freemasons in that day, these were craft masons. These were the men who actually built the cathedrals of the day. They were highly skilled men, and it was like an early trade union, and they wanted to keep the secrets of their skills to themselves. Good reasons for that. And so the humanist thinkers infiltrated into the craft Masonic lodges, and they then became the speculative Masons. They were called speculative Masons by the craft Masons because they wouldn't have known a square from a compass. They were just the humanists, the idealists, the academics, and so there are within the Masonic lodges today two types of Mason. The craft Mason, who is the genuine Mason and cuts stone and so on, and then there is the speculative Mason, and he's the humanist thinker. He's the person who, his purpose is to rebuild a new world order.
They used the Hegelian techniques. We know enough about Hegel to know that not only does this mean the dialectic process, the creation of conflict, but it also means that individuals such as you and I, or anybody watching this program, will be cogs in the state, that we have no individual rights. Our rights for Hegel, individual rights for Hegel, come about through obedience to the state. We see it in the educational process, which we'll probably talk about later, that we have adopted what I call a Hegelian system of education, which is not to bring out your innate talents, but to prepare you to be an individual cog in the state. But one of the first things you learn in this business is forget about capitalism versus communism. That is absolute nonsense. The two are, behind the scenes, are hand in hand.
It's a capitalist-communist conspiracy. One conspiracy.
Yes, but you need the so-called conflict between the two to keep people focusing. Look, keep you looking over there. You know, capitalism versus communism. You know, that makes a nice little picture. You know, you get books on it and films on it. Capitalism versus communism. That's not where the action is. The action is over here. Behind the scenes, and this is something you don't see until you investigate it, people who appear to be in opposition politically or financially or industrially or in many ways are working together. You create opposing forces which you place in conflict. Out of conflict, you've got profit. You've got political power, and you can direct history. You'll find that men in the same society will take opposite positions in public. So you've got William Buckley, whom I call a House Conservatism member, but so is a man, for example, called Edwin Burt, who has a string of communist affiliations, which is about that long. And we'll get into this later. The method they use is that of the Hegelian dialectic. Thesis played against antithesis leads to a synthesis. In other words, for Hegel, for history to make progress, you have to have conflict. And when you look at the key people in the order, you will find that they generate conflict. So Bush and Harriman politically are conflicting. Coffin and Buckley, although part of the same order, are in public conflicting with one another because conflict leads to the new synthesis. Basically, it is using the Hegelian dialectic. You establish one side, then you establish the other side, then you bring them into conflict, then you manage that conflict. So you establish Soviet Union, you establish Hitler, you bring them into conflict, World War II. By managing the conflict, you can control the next decade or so. We can find the order behind the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution. We can find behind the rise of Hitler. We can find in the maintenance of both of these systems, the transfer of technology to both. They wanted to set up, and they did, two opposing forces. Out of that came World War II. There were logical steps in the process. They used the same bank, Guarantee Trust Company, as the conduit for the financing of Hitler, and also as a conduit for financing, and also the early days of the Russian Revolution. In fact, in Russia, Soviet Russia in 1923, a vice president of Guarantee Trust Company was the foreign director of the Roscombank, which was the first Soviet overseas bank that was set up. They were that close in those days. You will get a very close relationship between the early Hitler days and members of the order. Which I have never seen anything in their literature which leads me to believe that they have our individual rights in their hearts. What I do see in the literature and in the documents is a ruthless drive to acquire power for themselves and to help each other, because this is one of the tenets of the order, that if you have three men coming before you for a job, the preference absolutely goes to your brother in the order. This is in my book, The Order, Introduction to the Order, I call these chains of influence. And I trace one pattern where Stimson brought the McBundy family into the War Department. Then the McBundys go on and become key people both in Department of Defense and in the Council on Foreign Relations. They help each other along the way. And when you get even a small number of men doing this, it can exert a very powerful force, a very powerful influence. When you get a group of quite capable men working together, they can wear down opposition, they can erode opposition, because they're all kind of marching in step. If you get three men marching in step, they can do more than 20 men marching to their own step. Do I make my point here? Mm-hmm. And within the order, for example, or within the administration, you've got, for example, Mr. Bush, and the people around Mr. Bush, Mr. Baker, Chief of Staff in the White House. And gradually you've seen the weeding out of those individuals who are independent. They've either resigned or they've moved out to other departments. So in effect the order has taken over very gradually, very carefully, without any fanfare. Some members apparently are not too happy once they become involved with this after 10 or 20 years. One member in particular left a memorandum. He wrote it in 1932. It was buried away in his papers. I don't think anybody found it before I did. And it was a 6-page memorandum on the order, naming some of the members, and said it was the most sordid thing ever happened in the history of man. In the words of one member, might is right. If you have the power, you use it to achieve your objectives. What is the objective? As you look at the histories of individual members, it can only be one thing: to acquire power, to keep power, to use power for their own purposes. Tuck's great work was to bring about the World Court, international law. International law in the World Court would be essential in a New World Order. If you take, for example, the career of Bush, Vice President Bush, when he was ambassador to the United Nations, he helped a process called mondialization, which was a process by which an individual American city would adopt United Nations stature. In other words, it's a diminution, a dilution of U.S. sovereignty. So if you look at these individuals, Stimson is another very good example. Averell Harriman, certainly, in the way he's financed the Soviet Union, his work towards the build-up of the Soviet Union. If you look at these individuals and ask what is the common pattern is the creation of a one world. The order has been at war with the United States in general since 1833. There's no question about that. When you look at their individual actions, people who've promoted conspiracy have made, they get across the idea that these people telephone each other and have little drawings and maps and diagrams. They don't operate like that at all. If you meet these people, they think alike, they talk alike, they come up with the same ideas simultaneously, and they move simultaneously, know what they have to do.
So they're a breed.
They're a breed. Exactly. Too many people are willing to look at these people as miniature gods. And because they have achieved power, don't ask how did they get power. or what they can do with the power, but just the fact that they have power makes them a god, and therefore they worship them. This, to me, is unbelievable.
The million-dollar question for American citizens and the world as a whole is, do Bonesmen put their frat fidelity above that of their civic responsibilities? As the BCCI case clearly shows, the answer is undeniably yes.
By the end of the 1980s, the scandal concerning the Bank of Commerce and Credit International was making the headlines. The BCCI was accused of laundering drug money and financing terrorist operations. The scandal tarnished the reputation of the US government, since the bank operated freely in America and was a regular contributor to political campaigns. The administration of Bonesman George H. Bush blocked the investigation, which had in any case been entrusted to a Senate commission chaired by Bonesman John Kerry. The BCCI was absorbed by more respectable banks, and the subject was never revived. Each year, only 15 students entering their senior year at the University of Yale are admitted. The candidates must have been tapped by those senior classmen of Yale University who make up the current membership. The criterion for selection also includes the candidate's potential to increase the power and prestige of the society. 2 votes against the candidate are enough for him to be rejected. During their initiation, candidates must recount all their sexual exploits. Finally, they are expected to perform various oaths, kiss some feet, and drink blood. They then have to lie naked in a coffin, and, after masturbating in full view of the others, swear to never reveal their membership of the order. The candidates are then introduced to their future companions, who wear masks for the occasion. Uncle Toby, the Knights, the Small Devil, Don Quixote, and the Pope. Their ceremony ends with a grand party that lasts for hours.
To imagine presidents of the United States in this situation is highly disturbing. But even more distressing is to realize that the candidate is now subject to blackmail. All the brethren have witnessed the humiliation of the candidate. Each one has spoken of his darkest secrets. Nobody now feels he can break the pact of silence with the order. As of that moment, betrayal is highly unlikely.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.